My presentation is on a positive attitude for decision making. For a positive attitude in making a decision, it is necessary to take knowledge as established facts, to use rational concepts, and to consider the future consequences of one's decision. Let me give you 3 examples of major thinkers. Each of them had a positive attitude and made a revolution in thought. Charles Darwin in science in England, Fridriha Ničea in philosophy in Germany, and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in theology in France. Each of these individuals had an enlightened mind, which gave way to critical thought and open inquiry. Each of them is an excellent example of a positive attitude, and each accepted a dynamic worldview. Let us take a look at Darwin. His thoughts resulted in a paradigm shift from fixity to change in terms of evolution. He had a positive attitude, which gave him what I call a dynamic integrity. His mind was open to new facts, to new concepts, to new perspectives. He overcame obstacles and criticisms because he was going against the general thought in science and philosophy and theology at that time. There are 3 major influences on Darwin in his early life. One is participating as a naturalist, not the naturalist, aboard the HMS Beagle as it sailed around the world in the southern hemisphere. His reading Charles Lyell, the father of modern geology. And of course, his visit in general to the Galapagos Islands. And later, his reading of Malthus on the principle of population. So it was Lyell, the voyage of the Beagle, especially its visit to the Galapagos Islands, and his reading Malthus that converged in his open mind and gave him the theory of organic evolution in terms of natural selection or the survival of the fittest. Today, as a result of his work, we have neo-Darwinism, since Darwin knew nothing about genetics or population dynamics. But his dynamic worldview remains, and not only that, but Darwin's dynamic worldview in terms of evolution influenced everything from geology, his specialty, to modern cosmology. Second thinker, Fridriha Ničea, who had been influenced by Heraclitus, the early pre-Socratic thinker, and Arthur Schopenhauer. Nietzsche spent his time wandering through the Alps, thinking and writing independently from a university or from any social group. He came on his own to the conclusion that God is dead as a meaningful belief, that one should go beyond traditional good and evil in making value judgments, and an ongoing re-evaluation, of all values. Values change too. And he made a distinction between the master morality of the herd, as he called it, and the slave morality of the herd, and the master morality of superior individuals. He had a positive attitude despite endless hardships in his life. He accepted Darwin's evolutionary theory, but he interpreted it in a remarkably different way. He believed that the universe is ultimately the will to power. It is a creative universe, life is creative, and a human being should be creative. from over-beings, that is, superior individuals that would be creative and free from the traditional values of the masses. And finally, his concept of the eternal recurrence of the same universe. For Nietzsche, matter is finite, but time is eternal. So eventually, no matter how long it takes, the whole evolutionary process will repeat itself again, forever. And an infinite number of identical universes. So Nietzsche himself has lived before, he's living when he writes his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, and he will live again. Every cycle is absolutely the same, he argued. This was a paradigm shift from theistic Christianity to atheistic existentialism. I've often thought that really what Nietzsche did is reinterpret God, immortality, and free will in terms of the universe, which gives him immortality because it repeats itself forever. And since he doesn't know how it was determined in the past and how it will be determined in the future, it's as if he had free will. The third individual, a Jesuit priest, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Now, Teilhard was influenced by Darwin and Nietzsche, but Teilhard was not a Darwinian, and he was not a Nietzschean. Teilhard developed his own philosophical worldview. He had been influenced not by Darwin, but by the French philosopher Henri Bergson. Teilhard desired a synthesis for the modern world, bringing together science and theology, within what ultimately became for him a mystical interpretation of evolution. Time for him was important, as it was for Darwin and Nietzsche, because it gave him time to think. It gave him time to write. And he did his research in China, near Peking, at Zhaocaolian, where he participated in the discovery of the Peking man. Teilhard attempted to overcome traditional Christianity. He wanted to give the human species a new view of God and the world in terms of evolution and in terms of convergence. In his time in China, he wrote a remarkable book, The Phenomenon of Man, between 1938 and 1940. The Vatican did not allow it to be published during his lifetime, but the wise Teilhard left his manuscripts to his secretary, and she saw to it, as he knew she would, that his books were published, including the all-important The Phenomenon of Man. For Teilhard, the universe is spiritual. It follows the law of complexity consciousness. There are from time to time critical thresholds. When the last critical threshold was crossed in evolution, the human self-conscious rational being came into existence. But he said, in the future, human beings will converge around the earth, resulting ultimately in an omega point, a final end to human evolution in terms of a collectivity of spirits. His paradigm shift was from traditional Christianity, as I said, to mystical evolution. So what would we maybe say about these three individuals? Notice, each of the individuals had time to think. Darwin on the Beagle, Nietzsche in the Alps, Teilhard in China. Each wrote a significant book. Darwin on the origin of species. Nietzsche, Thus Spake Zarathustra. Teilhard, The Phenomenon of Man. Each was an enlightened thinker because each had a positive attitude, as I have described it. Each believed in unity, and each believed in convergence. So I think the result of knowing these three thinkers and how revolutionary they were in creating a new worldview is that to make a decision, a positive decision, one must know the facts, one must be rational, and one must take seriously the consequences of one's decision.